What if I told you that Americans are being ripped off every single day, not by the drug companies you think, but by a shadowy system almost no one has ever heard of? Imagine this. You walk into a pharmacy for life, saving medication, and you're told it costs $1,500, yet just across the border, the exact same drug is only $147. How is that even possible? Here's the shocking truth. The system isn't broken at all. In fact, it works flawlessly, but not for you, not for patients, not for families. It works for a hidden middleman that quietly controls what drugs you can access, how much you'll pay, and even which pharmacy you're allowed to use. These invisible gatekeepers make more money than some of the biggest drug companies combined, and most people don't even know they exist. Welcome to the Nutrition Institute, where today we pull back the curtain on this scandal and reveal the uncomfortable truth no one else will tell you. If you're ready to uncover how America's healthcare system is being hijacked in plain sight, stay tuned until the end of this video. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support gives us the fuel to keep exposing the truths that matter most. I'll never forget the first time I learned about the price difference of a single drug between the United States and Canada. It was Ozempic, the diabetes drug that's also being used for weight loss. Here in the U.S., patients are paying around $1,500 a month. Yet, if you cross the border into Canada, the exact same drug is only $147. Now, let me pause there. Same manufacturer, same formula, same packaging. One country pays 10 times more than the other. At first glance, you'd think the drug companies are the obvious villains, right? After all, Big Pharma has long been painted as the greedy giant controlling our health. But the more I dug into this, the more I realized the real story is much darker and much more hidden. The shocking truth is this: the drug companies are not the only ones driving these insane prices. Behind the curtain, there's a group of middlemen that you probably have never heard of, yet they touch almost every prescription filled in America. They are called Pharmacy Benefit Managers, or PBMS, and in many ways, they are more powerful than the pharmaceutical companies themselves. So who are these PBMS, and how do they operate? Imagine walking into a restaurant. You're craving a burger that costs $15, but before you can even place your order, a man steps in between you and the cashier. He says, if the restaurant wants to serve you that burger, they have to pay me $5. If they don't, you don't get to eat. That's exactly how PBMS work. They're the toll collectors standing at the bridge between you and your medicine. And the worst part, they own the bridge. They decide which cars get to cross, how much gas costs, and who gets left waiting. At first glance, PBMS look like they're helping. They claim to negotiate discounts with drug manufacturers. They promise employers and insurance companies that they'll lower costs. They say they're reducing out of pocket expenses for patients. On paper, they seem like the good guys, smoothing out the chaos of America's drug pricing. But once you peel back the layers, you see the truth. PBMS have built an entire business model around manipulating prices, pocketing the difference, and keeping it all hidden from the very people who need these medications the most. Let's break it down in simple terms. The drug maker sets a list price, often absurdly high. Take insulin, for example. A month's supply can cost close to $1,000 in the US, even though it costs only a few dollars to make. Now, out of that $1,000 list price, anywhere from $300 to $600 can go straight into the PBM's pockets through something called rebates and spread pricing. Spread pricing means they charge your employer or insurance company a high rate, pay the pharmacy a much lower rate, and keep the difference as profit. But that's not all. PBMs also act as gatekeepers. They decide which drugs are covered by your insurance, how much you'll pay out of pocket, and even which pharmacy you're allowed to use. If a drug doesn't generate a big enough rebate for them, they can simply deny coverage, even if it's cheaper or more effective for the patient. In some cases, they force you to use their own mail order pharmacies, making sure every dollar flows back into their ecosystem. Here's the kicker. 3 giant PBMs, CVS Caremark, Express Scripts, and Optumx control about 80% of the entire U.S. prescription drug market. They've merged with insurance companies and own major pharmacy chains. Think about that for a second. The same companies that decide what drugs your insurance covers also own the pharmacies where you have to buy them. That's like the referee, the rule book, and one of the teams in a football game all being the same person. How fair do you think that game is going to be? I'll be honest, when I first learned about this, I was angry. Angry that patients are going bankrupt for life, saving medications. Angry that families are rationing insulin while corporations are raking in billions. And most of all, angry that so few people even know this system exists. We've all been told to point the finger at Big Pharma, but the PBMs have been quietly pulling the strings behind the scenes, taking their cut and keeping the system working perfectly for them. And here's the most important point. The system isn't broken. We often hear people say, healthcare is broken in America, but no, it's not broken at all. It works exactly the way it was designed. It's just not designed for you, the patient. It's designed for profit. Once you understand that, everything else makes sense. The astronomical drug prices, the bizarre restrictions on which medications you can get, the endless fights at the pharmacy counter, it all ties back to a shadow system that's invisible to most Americans, but controls billions of dollars every year. So when people ask me, why is healthcare in the U.S. so expensive? My answer is simple. Because there are hidden players in the middle who profit from keeping it that way. And until we shine a light on them, until we demand transparency, nothing will change. When I started digging deeper into the world of pharmacy benefit managers, I realized the story was far worse than I thought. It wasn't just about a few extra dollars here and there. It was about a system so carefully designed, so deeply entrenched, that it almost guarantees patients will pay more while the middlemen get richer. Let's start with the way PBMs make money. One of their biggest profit engines is called spread pricing. Here's how it works. The PBM charges your employer or your insurance plan a certain price for a prescription, but when it comes time to pay the pharmacy that actually fills the prescription, the PBM pays them a much lower amount. The PBM then pockets the difference. On the surface, this may sound like just another business practice, but think about it. Every dollar they keep is a dollar taken from either the patient, the employer, or the pharmacy, and none of those groups are exactly swimming in extra cash. Then there's the rebate system. This is where things get really twisted. Drug companies want their medications on the insurance formulary, which is the list of drugs your plan will cover. To get on that list, they have to pay the PBMs a rebate. The higher the rebate, the more likely the drug will be covered. On paper, rebates are supposed to help lower costs. In reality, they do the opposite. To afford these massive rebates, drug makers jack up their list prices. And since patient's company pays are often tied to the list price, we end up paying more. The PBMs, meanwhile, keep a huge portion of the rebates for themselves and never disclose exactly how much they're taking. This system has horrifying consequences. There are patients who walk into a pharmacy, discover their insulin will cost $1,000 for the month, and have no choice but to walk away. They simply can't afford it. Some start rationing their medication, cutting doses in half, risking their lives just to stretch out a single vial. It's heartbreaking, and yet, at the exact same time, the PBMS are raking in billions. You might be thinking, well, surely the government is doing something about this. And yes, recently the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, has taken notice. They've launched investigations and lawsuits against the three largest PBMS CVS Caremark, Express Scripts, and Optumix. The accusations are serious, artificially inflating insulin prices, manipulating the rebate system, and overcharging for specialty drugs used to treat cancer, HIV, and other life-threatening conditions. The scale of the overcharges is staggering, over $7 billion in markups. But here's the kicker. Instead of backing down, one of these PBMS actually countersued the FTC, claiming the government was making false and defamatory statements. Think about the level of power and arrogance it takes to sue the very agency investigating you. That's the kind of influence PBMS wield in our healthcare system. And it doesn't stop there. These PBMS don't just control the middle. Over the past decade, they've merged with insurance companies and bought up their own pharmacies. CVS owns Caremark. Express Scripts has its own home delivery pharmacy. Optumix controls mail order pharmacies as well. That means they have their hands in every part of the process, from deciding which drugs are covered, to setting the price, to dispensing the drug itself. With 80% of the prescription drug market under their control, they're not middlemen anymore. They're gatekeepers. That level of control is terrifying. Imagine if the person who wrote the rules of the game also owned the stadium, sold the tickets, and refereed the match. There's no competition, no fairness, no accountability, and yet, that's exactly what we're dealing with in healthcare. Patients don't get to choose another option. Employers don't have bargaining power. Even pharmacies are at the mercy of PBMS, getting reimbursed less than the cost of the drugs they're dispensing. For me, the hardest part of this to swallow is how hidden it all is. I'll admit it, I had no idea PBMS even existed until recently. I thought the blame for high drug prices rested solely on pharmaceutical companies. And while Big Pharma absolutely plays a role, the bigger scam is happening right under our noses, in plain sight, and almost no one knows who these players are. That's not an accident. It's by design. The less the public knows, the easier it is for PBMS to keep operating in the shadows. But here's the hopeful part. As more people learn about PBMS, the harder it becomes for them to hide. Investigations, media coverage, and lawsuits are starting to shine a light on their practices. And with that light comes the possibility of change. Patients, advocates, and policymakers are beginning to push back, demanding transparency in how rebates work, how spread pricing is calculated, and how much PBMS are really profiting. Still, we have to be realistic. These companies aren't going to give up their power voluntarily. They've built an empire by mastering the fine print, controlling information, and exploiting the complexity of the healthcare system. They'll fight tooth and nail to protect their profits. And that means it's up to us patients, families, and citizens to keep demanding answers. The sad truth is this. While other countries have found ways to negotiate fair drug prices and keep their citizens from being crushed by medical bills, the U.S. remains stuck in a system where shadowy middlemen control the flow of medicine. Until we confront that reality, patients will keep suffering, families will keep making impossible choices, and PBMS will keep laughing all the way to the bank. When you start comparing the United States to other countries, the contrast is almost painful. In Canada, insulin can be purchased for around $18. The exact same insulin that costs Americans nearly $1,000 without insurance. It's not just Canada. Across Europe, Australia, and much of the developed world, patients simply do not face the same outrageous prices that we do here. And the reason is actually pretty simple. Those countries don't allow pharmacy benefit managers to exist. Instead, their governments directly negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies. They don't play games with rebates or spread pricing. They don't allow middlemen to build secret toll bridges between patients and their medicine. Their laws require the best possible price, which forces drug makers to lower their costs if they want access to those markets. Now, some people argue that Americans pay more because we're the ones funding innovation, that the higher prices here subsidize research and development for the drugs the entire world benefits from. And yes, it's true that many of the most important breakthroughs in medicine have come from the United States, but does that really justify ordinary families going bankrupt just to buy life-saving insulin? Does it justify parents rationing medication for their children while CEOs and middlemen collect billion-dollar paychecks? I don't think so. Innovation shouldn't come at the cost of human lives. The real tragedy is that while our system bleeds patients dry, it also sets a dangerous precedent. If America, the wealthiest nation on earth, allows hidden middlemen to hijack healthcare, what's to stop other industries from following the same model? Already, we're seeing echoes of this in other parts of the economy, where complexity and opacity are used to justify inflated prices. Healthcare just happens to be the arena where the consequences are most devastating. And yet, there may be a sliver of hope. A few years ago, an executive order was signed that aimed to tie U.S. drug prices to those of other nations, called the Favored Nations Policy. It was designed to ensure that Americans wouldn't pay more than the lowest price available in countries like Canada, Germany, or the UK. The idea was bold. If other nations can negotiate fair prices, why can't we? The problem is implementation. Policies like this face enormous resistance from the pharmaceutical lobby, from PBMS, and from the insurance giants that profit under the current system. Every time reform is proposed, billions are spent to fight it. Lobbyists flood Capitol Hill. Campaign contributions flow like water. And somehow, year after year, Americans keep paying more. But here's the thing that gives me cautious optimism. Knowledge is power. 10 years ago, almost no one outside the industry had even heard of PBMS. Today, videos like this one are being watched by millions. News outlets are covering the lawsuits. Lawmakers are holding hearings. Patients are speaking out about being denied medications or crushed by out of pocket costs. The louder these stories become, the harder it is for the system to keep hiding behind fine print and technical jargon. And let's not underestimate the power of public outrage. In the past, industries that seemed untouchable like tobacco were eventually forced to change once the truth came out and the public demanded accountability. I believe the same could happen with PBMS and drug pricing, but it won't happen by itself. It will take persistence, transparency, and people like us refusing to accept the excuse that this is just the way things are. The reality is this: America's healthcare system isn't broken. That phrase is a myth. It's functioning exactly the way it was built to function. It's just not functioning for you. It's functioning for profit, for shareholders, for middlemen who figured out how to rig the game in their favor. And unless we recognize that truth, nothing will change. So where does that leave us? On one hand, we can look at countries like Canada and feel envy for their lower drug prices and government negotiated protections. On the other, we can use that comparison as motivation. If it's possible there, it should be possible here. The question isn't whether it can be done. It's whether we have the courage and the political will to demand it. For me, the lesson is clear. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. The more we expose the hidden role of PBMS, the more likely we are to see reforms that actually help patients. It's instead of corporations. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but every step toward transparency is a step toward a future where families don't have to choose between their health and their financial survival. And that, to me, is the ultimate goal. A healthcare system where the word care actually means something, a system where people come before profits, and a system where Americans aren't paying 10 times more than their neighbors for the same exact medicine. Because until we reach that point, the painful truth remains, our system works perfectly, just not for us. After peeling back the layers of this story, I've come to a realization that's both sobering and motivating. America's healthcare system isn't failing, it's doing exactly what it was built to do. It's just not built for us. It's built for profit, for power, and for middlemen who figured out how to position themselves between patients and the medicines they depend on. The case of Ozempic is just one example, but it highlights the absurdity of it all. A drug that costs $147 in Canada somehow costs $1,500 here, not because it's more expensive to produce in the U.S., not because it's better quality, but because an invisible network of pharmacy benefit managers, insurers, and corporations have turned access to medicine into a marketplace designed to maximize profit at every step. For me, the most painful part of this reality is knowing that the consequences are not abstract, they're human. These aren't just numbers on a balance sheet. They're families skipping doses because they can't afford the refill. They're patients walking away from the pharmacy counter in tears. They're children, parents, and grandparents whose health is directly tied to the greed of organizations most of us don't even know exist. And yet, buried within that frustration is a glimmer of hope, because once we understand how the system really works, we can no longer be fooled into believing the myth that healthcare is broken. It's not broken. It's perfectly engineered to deliver wealth to a select few. And once enough people see that truth, the pressure to change becomes unstoppable. So what's the lesson here? For me, it's this. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. The more transparency we demand, the harder it becomes for hidden middlemen to operate in the shadows. It's a reminder that knowledge is power, and when that knowledge spreads, it has the potential to reshape industries, laws, and lives. I also take away something deeply personal. Never assume the surface explanation is the whole truth. For years, I believed high drug prices were solely the fault of big pharma, but the deeper I dug, the more I realized there were layers of manipulation I had never considered. That lesson applies beyond healthcare. It's a warning to always ask who benefits, who profits, and who's controlling the story behind the scenes. So now I want to turn this back to you. Having heard about the hidden role of PBMS, do you think the U.S. healthcare system can ever truly put patients before profits? Or is this model too deeply embedded to change? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective, and I know others will too. And if this video opened your eyes or gave you something new to think about, please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps the Nutrition Institute keep creating content that digs deeper, asks harder questions, and uncovers the truths that really matter. Together, we can push for a system that finally works not just perfectly for corporations, but fairly for the people who need it most.